It's the holiday season and everybody's happy. So let's talk about books that made me cry. Hi, I'm Colleen. Welcome back. And as you could tell from the title of the video, this is going to be a list of all the books that made me cry in 2022. Now, I don't usually like to do these year wrap-up videos in December because I read a lot in December. It's one of my heavy reading months. So my best books of the year videos and stuff like that, you're going to get those in January about this year because it's just not fair to the books that I haven't read yet. But I was looking at what I have left to read from this point on, and I don't think I have anything that's going to make me cry. There's 3 books on my TBR that are maybe going to make me shed a couple tears, but I don't think any of them are going to make me all out sob. They are The Fifth Mountain by Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist, Brida, The Valkyries, The Witch of Portobello. None of them made me cry, so I don't think this one's going to make me cry. Winter Solstice by Ellen Hilderbrand. I've only ever read The Hotel Nantucket, which did not make me cry. This one I feel like is a slight contender for a tear up, but I don't think it's going to make me cry. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not going to start reading this until after this video comes out, so you'll never know. Not true. I'll tell you in my wrap up if it made me cry. Lastly, this is one that I think might make me cry, but I am hopeful it won't. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I've only read Daisy Jones and the Six, and I could see this kind of making me cry, but I don't think this is gonna break my heart. Tell me in the comments if this is gonna break my heart, and I'll wait till January to read it. Now let's move on to the books that I did read in 2022 and did make me cry. Here's a little bit of a disclaimer. I am a crier. When I was younger, in my 18 to 25 age range, I felt very much to be a good book, I had to bawl. I don't feel that way anymore. I was very much in a weird headspace then, majoring in literature in college, and then working in an indie bookstore that was kind of our opinions were a little snobby. And feeling like books had to be sort of sad and depressing to be good books. I don't feel that way anymore, obviously. And I started library school right after that and realized there's a lot of good books that don't make you cry. Sometimes you just want to read a thriller or a romance or a cozy fantasy that doesn't make you sob. But that's not what this video is about. I came up with a ranking system. It's out of 5 tiers. So 1 tier means that I had what a journey moment when I finished. I wiped away a tear or 2. My eyes watered. I moved on with my life. 2 tiers means that I had a moment in the book where I maybe did one of these and got sad about a moment and maybe cried for 15 seconds over it, 30 seconds, not much. 3 tiers means the book culminated in under 10 minutes of crying. So either I finished it and I cried for under 10 minutes, or at some point during the story, I cried for under 10 minutes. 4 tiers means I cried for between 10 minutes and 2 hours. We're only on 4 tiers to give you a little bit of insight into my life. 5 tiers means I cried for more than a day over this. So I finished the book. I had a big cry, a big, long, heaving, upsetting cry. And then the next day, at least the next day also, I still cried. Let's start with 1 tier. The first book I read of this year that gave me 1 tier was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I will say that I'm a person often in which I read a book like this where you go on a very long, almost lifelong journey with a character that I will shed a tear or 2 at the end, sort of to be what a journey. Now, Ariadne is the story of the woman Ariadne from Greek mythology. She is best known for helping Theseus defeat the Minotaur, and then she also is later the wife of Dionysus. And this is just the story, her stories told from her point of view, rather than from the point of view of Theseus or the point of view of Dionysus. And it was a great lifelong journey. 1 tier. My next one-tier story is Woman of Light by Kali Fajardo Anstine. This was a fun one because I finished reading it when I was at the park with my children on a beautiful day. I think it was July. It was gorgeous out. And I did have to wipe away a couple tears. This one, I do wonder if I would have cried slightly harder if I wasn't in public, if I just like let myself sort of sink into the ending. This is the story of Luz, who lives in Colorado Territory in the 1930s. And then you also get some flashbacks to her grandparents' generation and what their lives are like being Spanish speaking, being sort of like not outcasts in the society, but dealing with the blatant, rampant racism of the time period against people who were of Mexican descent / spoke Spanish. It's another one that's like a great journey story. This doesn't tell the whole story of Luz's life. It's more just like a slice of it, but you really feel like you like get to know her so well. And also her grandparents' generation was even more sad and amazing. And I do wish we had a little bit more time with them, but you should read this book if you haven't read it. Woman of Light, one tier. My next one tier book is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this was another one that was just like a journey. I cried because it was a journey. And it wasn't even a long journey, but like getting to the end of this story and looking at these people who were all older, looking back at their 20s-ish, like their 20s, I think some of them are in their 30s, at this time in their life, it just sort of hit me. And I wiped away a couple tears. And then I was over it. But I did see that this is going to be a mini-series, and I just saw that like this week, which I can't believe I didn't know. They already like released promotional pictures, and I had no idea they were making it. I could see watching it making me more sad than reading it. So I'll let you know. My last one-tier book is Electra by Jennifer Saint, and this also like the same author as Ariadne, who we just saw. This one is another Greek mythology retelling. This is the retelling of the Trojan War by the women who didn't fight in it. So you get the point of view of Clytemnestra, Electra, and Cassandra. And it is another one of those journeys. You follow them over, it's definitely over 10 years. I think it might be more like over 15 years. And like the choices they make, the decisions they make, how it affects their lives, how the war affects them. This was another one where I had like big tears in the first half, like more than at the end. So there's a event that happens that if you're familiar with Greek mythology, it's what happens to Clytemnestra right at the beginning of the Trojan War that sort of gave me like a tears moment. Not a bawling moment, but a tears moment. One tear for Electra. The next book is one that I don't have with me because I read it on my Kindle, but it's The Duke Gets Even by Joanna Shupe. There's the cover. You will notice this is a romance novel. This is not the first time Joanna Shupe has made me cry in a romance novel, but it's just this one line that struck me as so sad, and you just could really feel what the character was going through. And I'm not going to tell you the line because I would ruin the book, and you should read it because it's really beautiful and it's so hot. But it was one of those where I read the line and I had to stop reading and like cry for just a minute or two, thinking about the pain this main character was going through at the time. This is a Gilded Age romance about Nellie, who is kind of a woman like out of time because she's definitely more of like a modern woman, and the Gilded Age is like the late 1800s. And she's in love with this duke, but this duke needs to marry an heiress who's going to be a good duchess. He needs money, and he needs someone who's going to be proper for English society, and that's not her. And so you follow them. And they figure it out because it's a romance. So you're not going to cry at the end. You're going to cry in the middle. Next, I only have one book in the 3 tiers section, and it is The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. This is the story of Anna, who is the wife of Jesus. So if you're like not into reading sort of like Christian mythology, I would skip this one, but if you're open to it, it was beautiful and very sad, as you can imagine if you know the ending, which the majority of people, I feel like, know the ending. This is a book that when I finished, I cried very intensely for about 15 minutes, like big sobs, but then I was okay, and I could move on, and I got over it. And I can read this line that when I first read it, I thought was going to destroy me forever. I can read it and reflect back on what a beautiful story this was without feeling a pit in my gut. Like, why? Like that audio from whatever, TikTok and Reels, where the girl's sobbing and she's like, why did you write this book? We'll get to those in a second. That's not this one. Okay, now we're getting in the heavy hitters. Let's get to 4 tiers. My 4-tier book, cried for under 2 hours about, was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This was an interesting read for me because because I'm a Greek mythology kid. Like, I knew what was gonna happen, obviously. Like, I knew exactly a lot of the things that were coming. So there was a particular line in here about Achilles' fate to live longer than Hector, that when I read it, I was like, oh, good God, knife in the heart. So at that point of the book I cried for probably the last 80 pages while reading it. And then I think I cried for about another 30 minutes after it was over. My husband was like, are you okay? I was like, because a lot of times when I read these really sad things, I'll read them downstairs while he's in bed sleeping. And so I'll stay up really late, reading and sobbing and getting all snotty, but he'll be unaware. This one I read in our room because I started reading it at 7 at night. So he was still awake and he came in and was like, are you going to be okay? And I'd made him go downstairs until I was over it. To a point, I remember it being hard to fall asleep that night because I had a really bad headache from crying for so long. This is the love story between Achilles and Patroclus. It's a Greek tragedy. There you go. 4 big, fat, ugly tears. Now we're going to get into the really heavy hitters. 5 tiers, baby. My first 5-tier read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I knew this was going to make me cry because I have a very good friend and she read it and she's hard to make cry. She's read some of my stuff. The book that I have coming out in 2024, The Hedge Witch, has a very sad part in it. More than one of my beta readers has cried reading it. I love it. But she doesn't cry. She says oh, that's sad. Oh, that's sad. She reads very sad stuff. She watches very sad stuff. I lived with her in college and she doesn't cry when she's consuming entertainment. After she finished this, she messaged me immediately and said, this book made me cry. So I knew I was in for a doozy. This is another book, not unlike The Song of Achilles, in which I could feel the end was a very big buildup of tears. Sobbing reading the end, just crying so hard, trying to get through the end of the book. And then finishing it and then crying so hard. And then waking up the next morning and crying again about it. I think this was a finish cry, next day cry, and then depressed for a week about it. And then I read Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen right after, and it was the perfect. If you've read a really sad book, like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, or The Song of Achilles, or anything, Other Birds is a good palate cleanser for really sad books to kind of get you back feeling like a normal human being. So 5 out of 5 tears for Addie LaRue. I feel like if she exists somewhere, I hope she's happy. My last book, I returned to the library 2 days ago, even though I knew I was going to make this video, because I couldn't stand to have it in my house anymore because it made me so sad. I needed not to be reminded of it anymore. I needed to get over it. And it's Saga Volume 9. And if you watch my November wrap-up, which I'll put a link in the description, and you've read Saga, I talk about it in a spoiler fashion. So, you know. If you haven't read Saga, just know that this is a book series, graphic novels, that's a really epic space opera about a family that shouldn't exist. And the whole world's against them. The whole universe is against them. And to give you an idea of how upset this made me, I cried for 5 days after I read this. I sobbed reading the ending, and I like read it at the most inopportune time. I read it when I finished it when my kids were at school. I was like, oh, I have like 30 minutes. I'm going to finish this because they're very fast reads. I had like started it maybe the night before, which was a really bad idea. I had like 15 minutes before my kids were coming home from school. And then I had to like put the two big kids in the car, and we had to go pick up the little kids at preschool. And then I came home, and I think I turned on a movie for them and gave them a bunch of food, and I just went in my room and like cried really, really hard. And then I spent an hour Googling, because it's fantasy sci-fi, to make sure what happened really happened and was going to stay happened. And I was like, I'm sure it didn't really happen. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this, and it's going to be fine. And then all my Googling told me that no, it did really happen. And then I got so much sadder that I cried a ton. I cried for 5 days. I remember 5 days after I finished it, I sobbed. And then I made a decision that was really sad, and that's that I'm not going to finish this series, which is terrible. But I'm not going to do it to myself. I just can't. This one I give 6 out of 5 tears. I mean, like, crying for 5 days over a book is kind of insane. Like, it's kind of insane. But I am a sad person when I read or consume sad stuff. Here's an example. When I was 14, yes, I was a freshman in high school, Titanic came out, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio was like my crush at the point. Romeo and Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann one, is probably my most favorite movie of all time, and I saw it for the first time when I was 13, and I got like, you know when you're 13 and you get like hyper focused on something that it becomes like your entire personality? That happened with that movie. I was obsessed with every aspect of it. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to major in literature. I'm going to become obsessed with Shakespeare. I'm going to have posters of the two of them everywhere. I'm going to get a graduation dress that looks like Claire Danes' angel dress. I don't think I was the only person who went through this. So when I see that he's going to be in Titanic, I am like, I cannot wait. I'm going to see this movie like 15 times in the theater. Oh my God. I went with my best friend, who is not a crier at this point in my life, and I cried for the last 90 minutes of the movie. And then when, this is a spoiler, Jack dies, I couldn't handle myself. Like, I remember walking out of the mall, like, bawling. I couldn't stop crying. And my friend is looking at me and she's like, I was pretty sure one or both of them was going to die. You didn't think that was going to happen? And I like can't calm down. And I cried so hard for a couple days that's the only time I've ever seen Titanic. I've never watched it again. I've come downstairs sometimes. My husband's watching it and I'm like, I don't want to watch this movie. It's too sad. That was a super long aside about not a book for a book and writing channel. I don't know if I want, like, usually I would end this video by being like, what's the saddest book you've ever read? Throw it in the comments. You can. I'm not going to read it probably. I feel like this year I read a lot of really sad stuff that like were really sad that I had been saving, like Song of Achilles, Addie LaRue. I knew those were going to be really sad going into them. So like I had a feeling the Book of Longings would be sad. I had no idea that Saga Volume 9 was going to rip my heart out, but it did. So if you have a favorite sad book, throw it in the comments, and maybe someone who's watching this video will read it. I don't know if I will, or maybe it's something I've already read and I'd love to chat about it, because I did read a bunch of books in 2021 that made me cry, and I have every year of my life because that's just who I am. As always, I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book, or maybe you're about to start writing a heartbreaking sad book that will make me ugly cry for 5 days.